Greetings, friends. You are on the Military Reports channel. And today we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine on the 19th of April, 2024 year. A lot of things have happened today. Let's get started. But before we begin, I want to remind you that just a couple of days ago, to be more precise, on April 17th, we discussed very interesting news that came from the territory of Ukraine, from the territory of NATO countries. Let's say that on April 17th it became known that Zelensky was convening some kind of urgent NATO-Ukraine Council, at which Ukraine and NATO would try to discuss the issue of air defense system supplies, after which Jens Stoltenberg himself confirmed that yes, indeed, on April 19th we agreed that such a meeting would take place, and that Zelensky himself will also be present at this meeting. If you remember, back then I told you that in fact this is not a meeting about air defense, provision, and so on and so forth. If something is going to be provided, it has already been provided a long time ago. The main task, the main goal of this circus, which took place on April 17th, is the reason that there will not be, and so on and so forth. The main task of this whole situation was to withdraw Zelensky from the territory of Ukraine for the next few days. That is, they announced that there would be a type of meeting on the 19th, although in fact they just wanted to take him to a safe place. Since then, on April 17th, most likely, NATO intelligence had information that in the next few days the Russian army would launch massive rocket attacks on the territory of Ukraine. In connection with what all this is happening, I remind you that on the same 17th of April, on the same days, we received the first shots of attacks using Atakmos on Jankoy, on the airfield on the Crimean Peninsula. Here are these shots of the launch of the Atakmos ballistic missile. And as a result of this strike, these launches caused quite significant damage, as far as I understand, to the Jankoy airfield in the Crimea. There were publications, separate disputes between pro-Russian, pro-Crimean neutral cartographers, analysts. There was still damage done. Or there was no damage done, of course. Everyone was waiting for some satellite images, some more or less reliable information. And today, let's say they started publishing pictures from the 15th, from some more pictures. In general, nothing serious. And just today, on the 18th, they began to publish real normal, adequate pictures in good quality for the 19th of April. And these pictures clearly show the places where the blows were struck, where there was a fire, including the battery itself, C-300 or C-400, which was destroyed. There are several launchers and so on and so forth, with the use of American atomises. And that's when Zelensky also told them, brother, leave Ukraine, because we have dealt a serious blow. Apparently there will most likely be a serious response. And it was announced and slowly removed. On the same day, I remind you, on April 17th, the Russian Federation struck the settlement of Chernihiv, as a result of which significant damage was inflicted on the positions, on the grouping, on the command of the center. North Group, more precisely. This is the explosion itself. There is a large number of them. They say that there were officers, soldiers in the village itself, in this very hotel, which was destroyed. But in any case, it was naturally not all. That wasn't all. And Zelensky was removed, and the NATO countries, Western countries, were still waiting for a serious response from the Russian army. And this response arrived today, the 19th of April. More precisely, the response arrived yesterday on the 18th of April, but more precisely, the arrivals began. The strikes began on the 18th and today on the 19th. In fact, they may have ended, they may not have ended yet. Let's discuss what happened after all. Yesterday, as you can see, most of the strikes. Most of the geolocation is located above the settlement of Dnipropetrovsk or Dnipro. And now the first shots have been published. They were published just last night. Today we have mapped them. In these frames, we see with you, let's say, the C-300 divisions, and therefore the C-300 divisions of the Russian army, using the Tornado C missile system, strikes, as a result of which the entire division is completely destroyed. There are several launchers there. After the Russian army managed to suppress the air defense of the Ukrainian armed forces in this region, and the region was left completely without air defense cover, the Russian army has already begun to do whatever they want in any poses and any desires. A little later, another footage of strikes on the airfield in the Aviatorsky area was published. We see here the mark was several MiGs, several Un-26s were standing. Here is one blow. A little later, another blow was struck from a different angle in another parking lot, as a result of which several more MiGs were damaged or destroyed. In general, this is quite significant, and well, a good catch, so to speak. Is it possible to compare, let's say, this response and, let's say, to balance the losses that the Russian army suffered in the Crimea? It is possible and possible. It's hard to say here because we don't know the exact number. How many C-300 installations were destroyed there? And today, the Ministry of Defense reported this paragraph in its reports that rocket troops, artillery, disembodied aircraft of groups of troops of the armed forces of the Russian Federation destroyed 3 MiG-29 fighters within a week. Here we have just observed them, 4 Un-26 military transport aircraft, also on the same frames and in the first view. There are 2 air target guidance radars and 4 launchers of the Astrista anti-aircraft missile system, as well as an anti-aircraft missile system launcher. And Aresty was destroyed in the Kharkiv region in a week. These C-300 were destroyed in the area of Dnipropetrovsk, Dnipro, right here. And after they destroyed the planes and destroyed all the air defense, and so on, so on, so on, the Russian army decided, the Viks of the Russian Federation decided not to stop there, and today, on the morning of the 19th of April, they began to strike at the settlement of Dnipropetrovsk-Dnieper. As a result of the strikes, significant damage was caused, significant damage. Blows were inflicted not only on the city, blows were inflicted on the district, on the region. And the blows were heard not only in this city, but also in Pavlograd. The first shots of the inflicted fire damage are coming from Pavlograd. Here are the frames themselves. A blow was struck at the railway station. It is a very serious and important railway station, a key logistics hub that connects, in fact, the front line with Western Ukraine, with Western countries. And at the moment, this infrastructure facility has ceased to exist. We also see that it is worth noting that people have begun to notice that the Russian army is moving to a deeper level of conducting a special military operation. Now it is not only fighting from trench to trench, but now a serious dual-use infrastructure has really begun to be destroyed. If earlier the Russian army tried to avoid striking dual-use infrastructure, that is, one that is used for both civilian and military purposes, now if an object is used for both civilian and military purposes, then it is given a black mark. This is a military offense that belongs to immediate destruction. It talks about the power plant, it talks about railway stations, logistics hubs, bridges, and so on and so on and so on. Moments that were used are used in the issue and may not be used anymore. It happened in Pavlograd, yes. On the Dnieper of Dnipropetrovsk, the shots of strikes are probably another, so to speak, the command center of some group of troops in the Zaporozhye direction. It is very important to understand which object was really destroyed. There are several options here. If it's just, let's say, a bunch of mercenaries, the French, who came to strengthen the defense, or, let's say, manage another air defense system or something else, then this is one story and one consequence. If it is from Bolshniki, then it is possible that the blow was inflicted on those who organized, or were responsible for some terrorist attacks on the territory of the Russian Federation. If it is the leadership, the command of one or another group, then perhaps the Russian army is planning an offensive operation in the coming days. And in fact, there was an attempt to behead and bleed this brigade, this direction from the side to Jesus. Or let's say the creation of some kind of chaos and disorganization for a while, for the first days, for the first minutes of a possible offensive. So far, there is no information about what was really destroyed. That's also the footage coming from the bus station, including the bus station was destroyed. A large concentration of personnel is reported. But again, this is all a template. This is all a message that sometimes comes without even having any meaning behind it. Concentration of troops. In fact, something infrastructural, something important was destroyed in the settlement. Well, Zelensky has not yet returned to Ukraine. I clearly understand that there is nothing for him to do here. He is flying from country to country, like meeting and talking about the supply of air defense. Although in fact this is just a template behavior, another pattern, how to support him away from Ukraine. While Russia is inflicting massive blows. At the same time, he may be traveling to convey messages to Russia at the beginning about the possible start of negotiations. However, today Foreign Minister Lavrov made it very clear that even if peace talks begin, and Russia always supports holding peace talks, the fighting on the ground will not stop. They won't. And already when the signature is put, the signature will be put under the last square meters, say installed, over which the Russian army established control 5 seconds before the signing of the peace treaty. In other words, this is what Lavrov hinted at in general, and said that so far, even regardless of the negotiations, Russia does not see the expediency of stopping a special military operation. Well, in principle, this is understandable. Today, a large number of shots were published of just a huge number of T-80 heavy armored tanks being produced, just huge batches are being built, have already been built. They are simply being built in such numbers as I don't know how, well, as if sneakers are printed somewhere in some factory. That is, very quickly, in very large quantities. In particular, information was received today that the Russian army has begun construction, and, more precisely, construction has begun production in Omsk. In my opinion, now we need to find a second. We have started the production of new systems, let's say, flamethrower systems, CBT Dragon. That is, there was a post here somewhere, it got lost. Okay, we'll find it, maybe we'll see later, yes. In other words, they have already begun to produce new TOS, a flamethrower system, quite powerful and very dangerous weapons. And also published footage of the transfer and relocation of the next new batch of T-90. That is, well, Russia has definitely moved on. Perhaps the Russian leadership there also denies the transition to full military rails. However, based on the volumes in which everything is produced, definitely, if this is not military rails, this is what we see. These simply crowded hangars of the 80s, the endless stream of the 90s, and the construction of new Dragon sunspots. Then what is wartime and military rails in Russia? This is probably something incomprehensible at all. These are probably rockets that will be riveted by one rocket every second. But this, of course, can lead to serious consequences. But despite all this, today, among other things, interesting shots were published, let's say, as a result of today's strikes. The Russian Tu-22 crashed. The Ukrainians immediately began to report that they shot down the Tu-22 with the use of a C-200 missile. Well, that is. Well, in general, some nonsense, to be honest, yes. But later information began to appear that it seemed like a friendly fire was even possible, and the Ukrainian side revealed some details. That, like when it starts flying and a strike from the Russian Federation begins, it does not launch several drones in the same direction, and which allegedly shoot down the air defense systems of Russia, although this also sounds very like then so, with a pitchfork on the water. Maybe they're just trying to pull up by the ears. After all, Russia does have a serious developed system of friend-foe. It is, as Putin said, practically impossible for a strike to be carried out on one's own plane. It is possible that some tricks are being used by Ukraine, but it is still difficult to assume. What really caused the crash of the Tu-22? What were you waiting for? Let's go with you to the line of contact. Most importantly, the most important and interesting news does not come from the Sardian direction. Avdiivka direction, 5 on advanced reports. What can be noted for the last day? After the Russian army managed to gain a foothold on the outskirts of the village of Cheretiina, the armed forces of Ukraine, with great difficulty and with great blood, managed to stop the advance of the Russian army. Even perhaps, it is possible to stabilize, at least for a while, The front line along the Novobakhmutovka line, let's say, the southern outskirts of Cheratina, and then Novokalinovo Karamik. But the Russian army as a whole, as it were, has also been taught, having a lot of serious combat experience, decided not to advance further. Now there is a consolidation of software along the railway, on the first outskirts and streets of the queue itself. And in principle, the Russian army has moved on to what it knows how to do best, just equate Ocheretin with the ground, with cast iron. Artillery, everything that can be used at all, sandpex, everything that is in the arsenal. And in fact, the Terntina has become a frontline city. And it is another place where the VSU will naturally suffer heavy losses on a daily basis. And already, in principle, the fate of another is predetermined. There is no question whether the Russian army will be able to take control of the settlement. It's only a matter of time how much you have to spend, a week or two, maybe a month, but under such a barrage of blows and firepower. It's very difficult to withstand in any army in the world, including not only the Ukrainian one. No one would be able to resist. Perhaps the only army that is able to resist, because there is experience of the Ukrainian from such a shaft. It is very difficult to imagine the same NATO army sitting through under such a squall, such fire. It is unlikely that they will hold on to such a locality for a long time. But not the point. In other words, preparations are underway, the terrain is being leveled, preparations are underway for a further offensive operation. Perhaps in the near future, a week will come to an even level and the Russian army will continue its offensive. In order to establish full control over the queue on that part of the queue, which is located south of the railway. Then there will already be a more or less serious foothold. But still, again, despite some fighting in this direction, naturally all expectations. All eyes are of course directed at the locality of Novobakhmutovka and Berdik, which to this day are under the full control of the armed forces of Ukraine. This is really some kind of strange story. That is quite a serious advance to the north, but we know why. Because of the actions, incompetent actions, negligent actions of the leadership and personnel of the 115th Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, which simply allowed such a breakthrough to take place. But despite all this, both Berdichi and Novobakhmutovka are key points, key settlements for further rapid progress. At the same time, the Russian army continues to carry out massive fire, maximum fire damage, in the settlements of Karamik and Novokalinovo. Further progress is noted. Most cartographers update the maps, indicating the further advance of the Russian army. Here, a sweep is already underway, let's say the central one, whose Stanova Kalina is perceived by a drone. According to the ceramics, the Fabs arrive. The Fabs are flying here around the clock. This is a fairly new phenomenon, directly for this direction. Previously, of course, the Fabs did not reach here, but now there is a maximum concentration here, with the aim of suppressing the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine, and perhaps there is preparation to shoot back massively, so that as quickly as possible, while everyone is at a loss, to break through the central part, and go, let's say, to Ocheretina. Let's say, to reach the border on Ocheretina from the east. That is, even then it is already possible to align the front line with the same pace, approximately in this way. But, even then, in general, the battles will not only be very sharp, and even perhaps the Russian army leads to Arkhangelsk from the southeast earlier than from the east to the most populated place. Here the situation continues to develop quite dynamically, and so far the APU cannot show any decent resistance. In order to somehow stop or slow down the advance of the Russian army. You know, I caught myself thinking that everyone is talking about the beginning of the summer offensive. It seems to me that it has already begun. This is what we are seeing, this is already the beginning of the summer offensive. It started a little earlier than the 19th, let's say, from the middle of April. But if this is not an offensive of the Russian army, then what we see is that then it is even difficult to assume an offensive. Today, in a weekly summary, the Ministry of Defense once again confirmed the establishment of full control over the settlement of Pervomaiskaya. We took the locality a few days ago, today we just confirmed this information again in a week. The history of this artillery pocket, located between Pervomaisky and Nevsky, is still unclear. At the same time, information is received that the advanced detachments of the Russian army have gained a foothold on the first streets of Nedolev, fighting is going on, and gradually the Russian army is pushing through the defense of the AFU, forcing the latter to retreat. There has been no news on Krasnogorovka for the last day. After that, perhaps there is a process of consolidation on the southern part, the central part. Artillery is working, counter-battery fighting is working, positions are being monitored, drones from the armed forces are being suppressed. But no active actions have been taken on the ground. Along Novomikhailovka, the fighting is gradually shifting to the western outskirts in the general direction of Konstantinovka. Footage of drone strikes on evacuation vehicles that go from one city to another, that is, they go in convoys. And strikes are also being carried out on the private sector north of Konstantinovka with the use of FABs, are already being published in large numbers. We see what a powerful dense fire. Perhaps some kind of offensive firm victory is expected. Since the blow falls precisely on the northern part of Constantine in the cinema, if we talk about victory, there are some prerequisites or geolocations saying that it may not have been received. According to Ugledar, there has been a Russian army for the last few days. A few days ago, the Russian army tried to storm the positions of the Apu along the Solodka highway and, let's say, further on the water. And separately, cartographers are already rushing to update the maps, indicating that during the fighting, Russian troops managed to push the positions and troops of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. However, if we look at the frames on the basis of which all these updates are made, it's hard to say what. It is difficult to call that offensive a success. But we will not watch the footage due to the heavy losses among the equipment. It was the equipment that was exactly along the broad beam as the Russian army advanced. Well, for sure there was a promotion, and some success was achieved, since the footage was published directly by the armed forces of Ukraine. That is, we could not see anything else there. The cleaning and firing of the Afu positions north of Pavlovka continues. The Russian army is very concentrated here, very focused here. If you and I just increase the number, you see, the farms are equal. Apparently the positions of the Apu are still quite powerful dense farms. There is something to cling to in fact. But the bottom line is, if we increase the number of updates from the first day, then we see how the Russian army is working very closely on farms, crossroads, these suburban settlements. That is, they work closely, and if we proceed from the concentration of the geography of strikes, there are. It can be assumed that perhaps the Russian army plans to resume hostilities in the near future, in order to establish control over the southern suburb of Ugledar and come close to the settlement itself. That is, well, maybe. Extremely possible. And we remember that blows were regularly inflicted on Ugledar. In other words, it will not be something surprising, at least for us, based on, say, geolocation intelligence. The number of geolocations. There is no news on the Great Novoselovka harvest. Somehow, the fighting immediately quieted down. Most likely, the rotation continues along the work bridgehead, and for the second day or the third it brings fresh forces. And these fresh forces fall under constant strikes with the use of drones of the Russian army. If, on the whole, the Russian fighters manage to disrupt the rotation in this direction, that is, they are not allowed to leave normally, the second ones are not allowed to gain a foothold normally, then this in general can lead to the collapse of the front and the further advance of the Russian army. That is, they waited for a very long time, and rotation. That is, when the last offensive was carried out, the Ukrainians managed to rotate, bring fresh Ukrainian forces to advantageous positions. The Russian fighters had recently jumped into unfavorable positions and were waiting for this rotation. Rotation is underway now. Perhaps, according to the results of the rotation of the unsuccessful side of the Apu, the Russian army will be able to advance further to the northern outskirts of the settlement. Back Moscow-Artemov direction. Zelensky flew here today and started handing out awards and stuff again. Today he has a bonus in the chapel. Perhaps the footage is old, because after all, he was seen in Europe. Perhaps they are simply publishing what happened a few days ago, when Zelensky personally came to support the morale of the fighters of the Yarklok, after that treacherous retreat by the 67th Mechanized Brigade was founded, built on the basis of the Right Sector terrorist organization banned in Russia. But we know with you that if Zelensky has arrived, then in general, there is most likely an extremely high probability that in the near future it will be very difficult in the direction. But in general, it seems to be logical already. For quite a long time, Russian troops, let's say, have been butting heads for the eastern outskirts for this new microdistrict. And here it has already been shelled from all directions, from all sides. It is already logically time to undertake, let's say, ground operations, ground assaults. And everything from the Russian side is already working here. The Su-25th is storming, supporting, let's say, infantry on the ground. Drones regularly fly, disrupt rotations, disrupt the delivery of supplies, bull and everything else. But it's hard to work here tightly and, let's say, professionally. But in the near future, the intensification of hostilities is possible. In Bogdanovka, there is a further advance of the Russian army in the direction of Bogdanovka, the southwestern part, further to Kalinovka. However, the advance is very difficult, since from the heights of the Apu controls movement, and regularly strikes the Russian army with the use of drones. The next shots were published, let's say, of the sweep of the next stronghold of the Russian army on, let's say, new frontiers. Here they fly in, they beat, so here promotion is very difficult. Seversky direction, Belagorsky direction. There was another attempt on the part of the Russian army to attack exactly along the line, let's say the Lysychansk oil refinery. It is unclear where the two options wanted to move, of course, or in the direction of Verkhnykamiansky, which have been leveled with the ground for the last few days with the use of FABs, or perhaps it was an attempt to go north, in the direction of, let's say, a shallow dump. At least, if we talk about the shallow dump, then there were published shots of artillery strikes, artillery training, suppression of anti-tank oppositions, machine gun nests, suppression of observation posts there, let's say. They were beaten from all sides and worked hard. And they worked a little further north, closer to the settlement, with the use of ARB C-500s, so that the personnel could not go to reinforcements in a timely manner. That is, well, it's not clear. But again, apparently they wanted to cheat a little, either there or here, but in the end, they reached the intersection. And we see with you a large number of drone strikes, and it was not possible to advance further than the intersection of technology. As a result, neither there nor here in the offensive did not pass. In particular, there is activity in the disputed area. There are very waves of fighting going on here. Then it's thick, then empty, then thick, then empty. In general, somehow everything happens here. Next, it is worth noting that Zelensky also came to Slavyansk. It is possible that, among other things, an intensification of hostilities is expected here. The South Kapinsky direction is reported to be moving further towards the turns. Well, this area on our map has long been marked under the control of the Russian army. Separately, cartographers are only now painting it over, but for now it's well worth waiting, be patient. Because it's unclear how the whole story develops there and how it will develop in general. The 67th was transferred as a whole to the Kapinsky direction after the failure of work on the Clock direction. Kharkiv continues to be hit. Footage of the destruction or damage of the gas pipeline has been published today. And again, the goals, according to most analysts, are to damage, including the gas infrastructure. This gas is used in, say, households in order to once again somehow push civilians to leave the region before possible hostilities, which will certainly be very extremely heavy and extremely serious, fierce. Therefore, it is desirable for civilians not to be there, of course. And over the past day, a blow was struck on Odessa, the results of which are still unknown. Ukrainians continue to flow massively across the border. In these frames, Ukrainians are probably with you, who, like from some movie shot with Tuberg Forrest Gump, is running away from Ukrainians towards the Moldovan border. It is unclear whether he managed to escape or failed. In other frames, it is published how someone still failed to escape. They turn right on the street. The workers of the shopping center do not hesitate, and thus take all the people further in the direction of, let's say, camps. In the direction of training centers, and there, after small courses, they send them in the direction of Avdiivka, Osheratina, or somewhere else. In general, this is the story of the last day.